Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This teleforum series is hosted by the Manufacturers Rep Council, which is a community of the Auto Care Association. The council is comprised of volunteer leaders from manufacturers rep agencies across the country. I'm Mike Boyer, a member of the Manufacturers Rep Council. For those that may not be familiar with the Teleforum program, it is an outreach program the manufacturers rep community to reach out to sales professionals within the industry. However, with some great feedback from members, the program was expanded to offer all industry professionals ideas on how to navigate in business and generate more revenue. The Manufacturers Rep Council is proud to sponsor and bring this education series to the entire Auto Care Association membership. We have a diverse group of registrants listening in today: distributors, manufacturers reps, manufacturers, retailers, service providers, educational institutes, and many more. Today's topic is telematics, threat or opportunity. Our moderator is Behzad Rassuli, Senior Vice President, Strategic Development of the Auto Care Association. We are very excited to have three great panelists that are subject matter experts, so let's get started. I'll turn it over to Behzad and have him introduce the panelists.
Mike, thank you so much, and good afternoon for everyone joining us on the call today and everyone on the East Coast, and good morning for those of you joining us from the West Coast. As Mike mentioned, my name is Behzad Rassuli. I'm Senior Vice President at the Auto Care Association. And I'm incredibly excited for the conversation we have planned for the next hour on telematics. We're lucky to have such an experienced and diverse set of participants joining us on the call today to share their views on telematics. Joining us for our conversation today are Colin Sutherland, Executive Vice President, Sales and Marketing at Geotab; Mike Fitzgerald, Executive Vice President and General Manager at Innova Electronics; and Dwayne Myers, co-owner of Dynamic Automotive. I've been using the term conversation because that's really what we have planned for today. Telematics is such a dynamic topic with so many implications to businesses or people that interact with vehicles that I expect nobody has the answers to all the questions, and our panelists will probably be asking each other questions. So I want to use this opportunity to invite all of you to join our conversation by entering questions in the chat box, and my job today will simply be to steer the conversation and make sure we all walk away from this a little smarter on telematics. So first, maybe we do a round of introductions. If I can ask the panelists to introduce themselves, their company, and what telematics specifically means to their business. And Colin, do you want to kick us off?
Thanks, Behzad. Appreciate it, and thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you all this afternoon. I think it's a very important time in the world of the independent garage, but also a very important time for businesses to understand telematics. Our company, Geotab, is, I think, the second largest telematics company or provider of the technology in the world today. That means we make the devices that connect to the trucks or the truck or the vehicle's automotive OBD2 port, from the software to the device itself. So we understand it at a very deep technical engineering level. That's what we are, about 300 employees that produce this product, selling our technology through partners. And I have to say that, we've seen on the automotive aftermarket side, we have two of the top 4 national automotive parts retailers now using this technology throughout their entire delivery fleet. Combined, that's almost about 30,000 vehicles between those two companies alone. And then there's companies like Safelite Auto Glass that are using the technology now to not only use it for their own fleet, but also in their go-to-market strategy, connecting customers to their vehicles. So this is just a transformative time for this technology, and I look forward to sharing more this afternoon with everybody on the panel, as well as the folks that are joining us on the call.
Thanks so much. Dwayne.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Myers, co-owner of Dynamic Automotive. We've been in business 22 years, sorry. I've been doing this for 28. I'm also Vice Chair of CCPN, and I'm on the Education Council for the Auto Care Association. Telematics, it's a two-sided thing for us. It's definitely threats there, and I do believe there's a lot of opportunities. The threats, of course, is us, the independent garage, getting pushed out and not having access to the information we need, because telematics is how they're going to be commuting with each other to get the information so we can fix the cars. I believe, though, that if, with everything done properly and we get access like I think we will, it's an opportunity for the shops that stay ahead of the curve, that embrace the technology, have an open mind and go after it, and I think it'll actually help our business in the long run.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective from the service side. Mike, how about Innova?
My name is Mike Fitzgerald. I'd like to thank Mike Boyer and Behzad for the opportunity, and for everybody on the call for taking the time. Innova Electronics got into the telematics business a little differently than most telematics companies. Our history is that of an aftermarket supplier. Been a supplier to the automotive aftermarket exclusively for a little over 30 years. Our core expertise is in OBD communication. Sell, amongst other things, a variety of diagnostic tools, code reader scan tools. And we decided about 3 years ago to leverage that OBD communication expertise to try to develop a product specific to the automotive aftermarket. So I think if Innova brings anything unique to this conversation, it is the perspective of the aftermarket, designing products for the aftermarket to try to help and deal with both the threats and the opportunities, because there are both, that are going on today.
Great. Thanks for the introductions, everyone. All right, we'll just dive right into it. I want to give the opportunity for the audience to kind of calibrate the conversation we're going to have today, and calibrate their level of knowledge and experience with telematics. It sounds like we have 3 experts on this topic on the phone today, and that you 3 must really be seizing the opportunity that exists with telematics, and really kind of at the leading edge of the buzz in the industry around the term. But I just want to make sure that I'm correct in that assessment. Dwayne, is that the case?
I was telling you earlier that we've tried using the dongles and the telematics and trying to sell them to our customers, and we partnered up with a company, and we thought we weren't going to have a problem. And what we found was we didn't do that well. We weren't able to sell them. And then I even actually backed it down to trying to give them away to some of my better customers and fleets, and offering to pay for some of the subscriptions. And they were very hesitant and pushed back, because what I found was most people weren't educated about what was going on. They didn't know about the information that was out there, and they didn't like the fact that if they went with this new product with me, that it would now be going out there if it wasn't in the past. So I have to say that we failed originally trying to sell our devices, but I do believe that there is another opportunity for us to try again, and with a different approach, educating people and getting the information out there. That way they find the value in what we're trying to provide.
So when you were talking about selling it to people, you're talking about consumers, correct?
Yes, talking about people, customers with, I went after fleets. I went after, which we had some success with, but not a lot. Then I went after, I went to my normal customers that had kids, that were just getting into the driving age, and I went for the geofencing and starting the car up at the middle of the night, and they were lukewarm to that. And then I even tried with the elderly. As our population is getting older, we have to care for our parents, and they as well can get lost or need assistance and help. I tried a lot of different avenues, but I didn't seem to be very successful in any of them.
Elderly need assistance, but they don't necessarily want it just yet. Understandable. So it sounds like adoption is a challenge, and you mentioned the fleet side. Colin, you guys are obviously successful on the fleet side. What are you seeing? Is it still a challenge for you to sell telematics into the fleets?
So the fleet world in the United States has about 18.5 million vehicles. That's the size of the vehicle population for fleet. There's about 6 million vehicles that are presently using telematics in their fleet. We expect that number to grow by about 4 million over the next 2 to 2.5 years by about 2020. So there's a massive upside. If you think about 6 million today, that took us about 16 years to get to 6 million connected vehicles, and then in the next 2.5 years, we're going to grow by 4 million. That's a massive number. Now, a lot of that is being powered today by the U.S. government's electronic logbook requirements for trucks. So we expect about 2 million of those connections to be on the trucking side. And for the interest of the folks on the call that may not know what the electronic logbooks are, they don't just affect truck drivers on the road with their tractors and their trailers, but even small fleets, F-350 pickup trucks hauling a trailer, 150 miles or more, they need to have electronic logbooks in their cab. So this affects not just the trucking community that we see and share the highways with going interstate. In the fleet world, there's probably not a fleet out there that's not becoming educated in the electronic log device legislation that takes effect December 17th of this year. So we've got about 6 months to go. And but overall, the market's really poised for some very aggressive growth. And I hear what Dwayne's saying, on the consumer side of the house, a lot of distraction around personal insurance. We all saw Progressive Auto Insurance's commercials for Flow, and you put this thing in your car for 6 months and you get an insurance discount. And that industry is it doesn't make any money. There's not a lot of money in it, and quite honestly, it'll probably go to smartphones and getting data from car manufacturers directly, and not rely so much on aftermarket dongles plugging in the insurance personal space. But having said that, even on the personal line space, if you follow Verizon and their Hum product that they're selling, they've got 500,000 Hum products they put on the market in a year. T-Mobile's got T-Mobile Sync Drive. They've got 350,000 T-Mobile products in the market sold to consumers plugging into the OBD2 port. So between two wireless carriers, T-Mobile and Verizon, you got 850,000 connected devices, and that's in the last year. So there's obviously demand from the consumer side as well as the fleet side of the house.
It sounds like there's demand across the board, going from 6 million to 10 million on the fleet side in the United States, and 800,000 on the consumer side. You mentioned, Colin, let me stick with you for a second. You mentioned the electronic log being being kind of a mandatory case in the United States that's really driving the growth of telematics. But for someone like Dwayne who was trying to sell into the fleet space, what are some of the other benefits that you find people really attaching to and finding useful with a successful implementation of your telematics systems?
On the fleet side of the house, the number one driver is safety. So telematics doesn't just track the vehicle, the speed, the braking, the rapid acceleration using high RPMs, the accidents that happen with our G-force readers. People want to know who is driving behind the wheel. So telematics has the ability to know that Colin is responsible for the braking, the accelerating, the speeding activity relative to posted road speed, the seatbelt activity. They're trying to deal with claims. A lot of fleets self-insure. They don't go to commercial insurance. They self-insure their own risk. So if you're a self-insured fleet, then obviously you want to know how safe are your own drivers and how can they manage them properly and coach them. So I'd say that right now, outside of the trucking community with electronic logs, safety and driver coaching behind the wheel to make sure that drivers are safe is probably the number one driver for fleet telematics today.
That makes a lot of sense, especially the insurance side of things, being self-insured. Mike, so we heard Colin talking about how maybe on the consumer side, we might move to OE embedded technology, being the driver for telematics. What's the opportunity that Innova sees or saw 3 years ago when you launched into this space for some of the tools that you're building?
If I can, let me just also touch on the timing of all this. We got into telematics 3 years ago. We've been doing fleet for 2.5 years, but we just decided to roll out what we call repair shop products. And I think it's a statement to Dwayne, relative to Dwayne's comment about he was maybe before his time. Dwayne, I think that a lot of the earlier products were more expensive. I don't think people were as aware as one thing Verizon and the cell carriers that Colin mentioned have done. They made people aware of this kind of product, and they're after something that's cost effective and they see value in. We think the time is now, and to more directly answer your question, Behzad, we thought the time was now. We saw this potential threat in the aftermarket and said, you know, we could wait for OE to make a decision, start to change vehicles in 3 to 5 years, but it would take 15 years before OBD in the 250 million registered vehicles that have an OBD port for the majority of those to go away. So we thought it was time to offer an opportunity for the Dwaynes of the world to be able to reach out to their customers, connect to them, provide a peace of mind warranty. We've learned a lot in 3 years. We've made a lot of mistakes in those 3 years. You look at, and I don't want to pick on any of the OEs and their current telematics services, but the publicly traded guys that report the renewal rate after a free telematics program when you buy a new car, the renewal rates in the mid-single digits. They just don't do well. The consumer just doesn't see the need to spend hundreds of dollars a year. So a cost-effective solution distributed through the repair shop, because there's the emotional link that already exists, I think we're really at the forefront of the growth of that repair shop opportunity to connect with his customers.
Well, it certainly sounds like it. So let me try and drill down a little bit into convergence of thoughts that I'm hearing on the call here. So it sounds like, from one perspective, well, we have a couple of data points already that say consumers aren't really going to pay for this tool or pay for this service embedded by the OEs, but OEs are increasingly embedding this into their vehicles, and connectivity is kind of becoming standard on vehicles. So what is the, if I'm a vehicle owner, I'm going to go out and buy a car today, do I have the opportunity to go to my service shop and say, I want to use a Verizon product to get my telematics service, despite the fact that my vehicle has one embedded? And if so, or if not, what's the opportunity for, what are the aftermarket choices to make that happen? And I'm just going to open that up to all three of you if anyone thinks that there's a good answer to that.
It's Mike Fitzgerald. I believe that there are multiple aftermarket solutions or non-OE solutions available today. I don't think that that the average consumer, certainly the repair shop, has to wait for an OE solution. You mentioned you said Verizon, and I don't have a tremendous amount of detail about Verizon, but most telematics providers, all proprietary software, if you go into a repair shop, most of the telematics providers don't even have an option for the repair shop to access the data directly. There are some. There are some that have a portal and a login for the repair shop, and he can get his customers' data, but it's very few and limited. If the consumer buys it first and then goes to the repair shop, they're not as likely to be connected, the repair shop and the consumer today.
Yeah, this is Dwayne. I agree with what Mike's saying, because we've had the one service I tried to provide. We had a login where we could see part of the data, not all of it. And at that point, I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't super successful back then, but I do believe reapproaching it will be successful. We've talked to customers about, some of the Verizons and the T-Mobiles, and some of them have picked them up because they are fairly inexpensive, but there is no connection between the shop. It's still all on the consumer. We're not able to help him with that data like we would if we could had a portal to log in.
I see. Colin, so we sounds like Dwayne was mentioning the fact that he's accessed the tool. He had some limited visibility into some of the data that he was able to see to really build that relationship with this customer. But earlier you were mentioning data attributes coming from the vehicle, such as brake pressure, steering ferocity, and acceleration. Is this going to be collected for me when I buy my new car?
So that's a good question, because it depends on what brand you're buying. Look, we're at a period of time between 2017 and 2020 where some of the new car that you just talked about maybe buying depends on the brand of the car. Some of the car manufacturers, especially some of the foreign car manufacturers, really aren't trying to comply with the OBD2 standards on this side. They don't quite understand that. They're filtering it off. They're siphoning. They're taking off the sensor data that we want to have access to. We think that is meaningful while the vehicle is driving. In one case, I think you have to have the trunk open and the doors open in order for the OBD2 port to be available. And all the folks on the call today understand that if you're diagnosing a vehicle, sometimes you need to go and put that engine under load on the road test with your scan tool so you can actually see what's happening. So I think the reality is that the car manufacturers are trying to do everything in their strategic vision to restrict our access to diagnosing cars using the tools that they produce and provide for themselves. From an aftermarket standpoint, I think that even some of these gadgets that Verizon or T-Mobile are selling they try to pretend to make them feel like it's an engine diagnostic tool. It really isn't. It might tell you that the check engine light is on, which might drive the person to want to go to their local garage to get their vehicle fixed. Of course, if it's an OEM-generated tool, they want to drive it to the OEM. There's some long-term problems with the OEM strategy. What happens when the vehicle is out of warranty? Do they care anymore? Quite frankly, I think the OEM's horizon is very limited in terms of its warranty period, and they don't really have an answer for what they want to do with the vehicle out of warranty. And with the average age of a vehicle, we all know it's over 11 years, so we have to care about vehicles, in the 6th, 7th plus years of their life. So there's tremendous reason why we want to preserve our right to go and have aftermarket technology to connect to the vehicle, to identify, that a vehicle needs to be repaired, and to then schedule that vehicle in for service at a local garage. But the OEMs just obviously don't see that in their roadmap themselves. Probably quite the opposite.
So you don't see the OEMs turning to the aftermarket to help them solve collecting telematic data from the vehicles on the road?
Just the opposite. So the OEMs themselves, depends on which ones you're talking about. If you look to Europe as the example, and we do look at Europe as the example right now, so the European automakers are a little more aggressive than the North American automakers today. Of course, the North American automakers have the EPA to deal with, so they're kind of mandated in this space to keep that OBD2 port available. The Europeans, if you know a European car, they do everything they can to almost hide the OBD2 port to make it difficult to go and plug something into it. Having it underneath the parking brake in some cases, it's kind of crazy where they position the OBD2 port. But in Europe, the car makers are specifically looking at ways to go and try to create what's called a cloud environment, have the data from the vehicle go to a OEM-owned and neutral server, and that the OEMs would then license data access to independent parties, including their own repair shops. So the OEMs, I think, are using Europe right now as a bit of a test bed to see how all this is going to fly. And if they're successful over there, we're very concerned about what that might mean over here. Specifically, some of the German automakers are a little even more aggressive with people like BMW's, one of the BMW's technology guys saying late April, I believe it was, that they didn't feel that telematics data should be made available while the vehicle is driving. While the vehicle's parked, ignition on, you can have access to it, but while it's driving, he didn't think it was a good idea to make telematics data available through the engine port because he didn't think that third parties deserved to make money from it. I mean, that was his kind of rationale. It was a security concern. He was concerned that when that vehicle is driving around, the data coming to that OBD2 port is worth money, and they didn't feel that should be just given away for free. So this is kind of the mindset of some of the OEMs, and we can see this happen not just in BMW's case, but in others. But the mindset is quite troubling, that the OEM is valuing the data coming from the engine port, and if there's money to be made in data, you can be sure that the OEM is going to try to create a method to be part of that financial transaction somehow through restricting access or through making it available.
Absolutely, sounds like it. So, Dwayne, you heard Colin just now talking about the OEs wanting to limit the real-time telematic data being communicated from the vehicle. At the independent repair shop, is access to that real-time data important to you, or are you happy being able to log in periodically and getting data dumps from that data? What's the benefit of that real-time data to you?
The real-time data is essential to diagnosing almost any problem. Pretty much anyone that has worked on cars or knows cars, when the code pops up for what's wrong with it, I always tell customers that's our starting point. That's not the answer, that's the question. Basically, that gives us an idea of what to start looking for, because there's a million things that could cause an oxygen sensor to come on that has nothing to do with the oxygen sensor. We need that real-time data while the car is moving many times. And we spend a lot of time test driving because you have to put it in a real life circumstance. The car doesn't brake sitting still usually, it brakes while it's being driven. So we need access to that data. Without that access, we would be very limited on the repairs we do, which would trickle up to what we buy from our parts suppliers and the manufacturers, because we can't fix what we're not allowed to get information on, because you need that info to get the right conclusion and the right diagnosis. As far as the ODB2 port, I've heard about it going away, about it staying. I don't think it's going to go away right away because the emissions in the U.S. require it. But I do see them limiting the data, because there's a lot more pins on that ODB2 port than what they have to put on there to be compliant. I can see them backing some of that info down, but I really think that's where it's so important for us as independent repair shops, for the parts suppliers and the manufacturers to educate people, not just our customers, but also our elected representatives, that they need to understand what's going on, because if they cut off my ability to do work, that's only going to go right through the entire aftermarket community, because in the end, I'm the one putting on the parts, but I can't do that unless I have that data. So we got to get that word out to people, how important it is to get it.
That's very insightful. I guess, so I was going to take this a different way, but let me back up for a second. Mike, you just heard Dwayne talk about the impact on the rest of the aftermarket, the parts and the products that he needs. How do you see if you can expand on what Dwayne said a little bit, how do you see not having real-time access to that data impacting the parts and the products that the aftermarket provides?
Well, we go back to the title of today's telematics threat or opportunity. I think that is the ultimate threat. it's probably by far the doomsday solution to everything. Dwayne certainly touched on how it would ripple effect through the economic climate of the aftermarket, but it would go beyond that as well. If you know, we were in the scan tool business before we got the telematics business, still are in the scan tool business. A lot of companies make a lot of money selling tools. You read some of the technologies that are being considered. If they truly become self-diagnosing cars, you could virtually eliminate an entire tool industry. And the impact of that is pretty profound. So I don't care if you're at what step in the aftermarket you are, what position, what job, whether you work in distribution, manufacturing, sales, you will be affected by the car manufacturer being successful in convincing the government that they need to control this. It is probably the worst thing that could happen to the aftermarket in one single piece of legislation.
Well, yeah, that certainly does define doomsday scenario. So let's turn it around and see how. Let's talk about gaining access or building products to communicate the telematics information coming from vehicles. And I'm going to assume either Colin or Mike has a good answer to this, but Dwayne, you'll also have a perspective. What does it take? We'll get a little technical for a second, but what is the technology in these devices, or what technology do you need in a shop or through a tool to be able to connect to the vehicle real time? Is it a wireless connection? Is it 3G or 4G? Is this Bluetooth going through the cell phone? What's some of the technology involved here, and what are the investments that businesses in the aftermarket are going to have to make? And it's open to anyone who wants to hop in.
So I'll take a start at it at least. I'll tell you that from our perspective, I would not be using anything that's Bluetooth today, although there are some Bluetooth aftermarket devices on the market. The reason that I'm really negative on Bluetooth technology is because of cybersecurity risks. Bosch themselves were hacked. Bosch is like a OEM tier 1, obviously, and they were hacked by a cyber attack in February through a Bluetooth connection. There's new standards that are going to be published in 2018 in Washington around how to connect to a vehicle using wireless methods. Although it's possible to use Bluetooth, the vast majority of technologies that use Bluetooth today are just simply not secure. So we think that Bluetooth is probably the least secure of all the different wireless technologies. Cellular wireless is the way to go. And today you've got Verizon's 1X RTT and the AT&T's 3G network. It's moving to LTE. So when you're talking about long-term bets today, LTE 4G is the right place to be until about 2025. So if you have a chance to invest in the technology, think about LTE for your investment. Anything else will probably only last about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years tops. So just be thinking in terms of LTE. Cellular is naturally encrypted itself in terms of the data, so it's a more secure method of wireless transmission into the vehicle because it uses its own encryption. In addition, the vendor themselves might use a secondary, whoever the provider of the telematics might be, may have their own secondary methods of encrypting the data and then securing the connection to the vehicle. So that's what it is. And then affordably, it's data doesn't cost anything anymore from these cellular wireless companies. It's very inexpensive. So again, from a cost perspective, these technologies are available for very little money in terms of the technology today.
Dwayne, Mike, did you guys have to access any type of special software or hardware to tap into the vehicle's data?
Well, Behzad, this is Dwayne. I want to add a little bit to that. You're talking about, getting into the telematics or the data, looking forward, and something hopefully that I'm sure the government will have to be involved in this, because I know the OEs aren't going to do it, is, they're all talking different languages. And the nice thing about ODB2 is we went to one port and one hookup. my fear is if we let them grow, the OEs grow on their own without someone giving them a direction of how we want to talk, I'm going to end up having to buy 8 scan tools to do the same job on 12 different brands of cars, and that would be hard on me. I expect to have to buy a couple of scan tools. As far as information, I'm used to paying for information. That's in the cost of the price. As far as like cell data and all, they're right. It's not that expensive, and we're used to paying for that. That's nothing new. Information's king, and information costs money as long as it's accessible. But I just don't want to go back to the way it used to be, where I have to have all these different tools for each different car because they're talking different languages.
Mike, that's not just an independent aftermarket service shop challenge. That's going to be a dealership challenge too, right?
Potentially, yes. There's a history of lack of love affair between OE car manufacturers and their dealership networks. So that they're not necessarily going to be protected from what Dwayne just talked about. I mean, you look at all this telematics data that OE's collecting, kind of quietly. They don't share it with the dealership community. So yeah, I think to answer your question, I think that is just as big a risk and threat for the OE car dealers as it is the aftermarket.
So
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go.
I just have a point. I wanted to, Colin. I agree with 96% of what Colin said from a technical assessment. A cellular dongle is by far the best way to go for a host of reasons: features, functions, reliability of data, consistency of data. But I think one thing that got dismissed in that, and I think it's important to understand, we already covered ground that the consumer doesn't want to pay. He doesn't see any reason why he has to pay money just to know about his car, or so that a repair shop can repair it easier. He just doesn't see that as a burden and a cost to him. So what Bluetooth is becoming, today's Bluetooth, most current versions of Bluetooth, low energy, automatically syncing, dongles that do have a second layer of encryption, Bluetooth has to be considered as a cost-effective option. For consumers that don't want to pay, for repair shops that want to be aggressive marketers, in a lot of cases, $100, $150 a year per customer is too much money. They can't, the shop can't afford it, and the consumer won't pay for it. Good. So I believe there is a niche, a pretty big niche, frankly, for Bluetooth products. With all their shortcomings, I understand some of those shortcomings, even though technology has overcome some of those. Bluetooth offers an affordable option, and right now, my opinion, the industry is desperately seeking an affordable option. I'll get off my soapbox.
Thanks. Thanks for the input. I want to use this opportunity actually to then invite the audience again to join our conversation by sending us questions through the chat feature on the GoTo webinar. Colin and Dwayne, we all agreed that real-time access to this data is essential. To monitor the vehicle, Colin, you said, Dwayne, you mentioned that the dash light coming on about a warning is not the solution. It's actually the identification of the problem. But with that real-time access, real-time what's going on with your customer's vehicle. Is there any liability that comes with that if you don't do anything and react in time?
That's a good question. There's always liability when you're taking care of a customer's a vehicle. I know when that data is available, we have to be prepared for it. I think that's one of the things that shops, if they're going to get on board for the opportunity side of this discussion, they have to prepare and be open to the new technology. And yeah, you're right. If something comes up, say that they have a misfire, and we don't contact that customer and say, hey, your check engine light's on. We just noticed it came on, and it's coming on for a misfire. That's something that needs to be addressed now, because the catalytic converter can be damaged from that. If we don't do our due diligence and call them, you know, there is a case there that they could say, hey, you didn't call me, now I want you to pay for it. That's something where I guess we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it, but there has to be some, you know, there has to be some ownership to the data. Once that data is ours, we have to own it. We have to do right and our due diligence to do what is right for our customers.
And not just the data, but the relationship. Colin, I imagine that's true on a larger scale when you have a fleet customer.
Yeah, so we actually we use a lot of data in Google BigQuery, so we use all those big data science in our company. We've been storing we store about 1.5 billion pieces of data a day from all of the vehicles that are driving in our ecosystem. We've been doing that for about 2 to 3 years now. So when we studied check engine light, for example, we know the average number of days before the check engine light is cleared is 10. So, and that in any given day, 20% of a fleet's vehicles driving around will have a check engine light on. That's shocking news. Like when we showed that to our clients, and this isn't guesswork, this is from our big data study. We take a look at the VIN number and the check engine light for all the vehicles driving around and how many of those vehicles have a check engine light on, and we trace the average number of days for that specific VIN until check engine light is cleared, and then we can also take a look at that data and see if the vehicle was towed before it was cleared. So we know that the ignition was off, but the vehicle was moving. I can tell the client that a certain percentage of the total check engine lights were cleared because of a roadside failure that could have been avoided. So all that's empirical data today, which is, again, one of the reasons why telematics is a cool tool now. It's not just a scan tool looking at, you know, PIDs coming from a vehicle. This data is helping us be more clear about what is the real opportunity to help customers reduce the total cost of ownership of the vehicle by keeping things up and running. The reality is you're seeing organizations beyond the typical telematics companies now also understanding this. So you're seeing the oil and the lubricant guys getting involved in selling telematics technology to their customers for customer loyalty. You see the tire guys, Michelin Tire and Continental, just recently invested themselves in telematics technology in order to go and create more tools, more smart tire programs, and then you know, create more loyalty. So you're right, the consumer doesn't want to pay for this technology, and quite frankly, the consumer's not going to have to pay for the technology. That at the end of the day, it's people that are stakeholders in the data, the oil lubricant guys, the fuel guys, the tire guys, the independent garage calls, that are people that are on the call today. You all are stakeholders in the data coming from the vehicles. So the accessibility of data is key. I don't think there's any doubt, and hopefully there's no doubt for the people that are joining the call today, that their future as a business is going to rely on your accessibility to the data. The question is, at what price and how are you going to drive your own strategy to get comfortable with that? And it's a pretty low-cost investment to start using this technology, 1 or 2 devices in each independent shop, to use it in your own internal vehicles. If you've got a towing service, require your towing service or your preferred towing service to go and put a device into their tow trucks and drive that business right back to you. You know, there's a way to create a sensible ecosystem around this so it doesn't cost the independent garage owner any money, but it does get you in the game. It does get you looking at the data and does get you thinking about open data and sharing of data, so that when, you know, the oil and lubricant and the parts resellers and come to you and start talking to you about how they may have a telematics program and they're sharing with you, just understand that you're not going to be logging into individual software portals in order to see the data coming from these guys. They're going to be sending you called an API, which is the access to the data itself. So you're going to be able to create your own consumption of the data using the tools that everybody in this business is busy investing in. So that's kind of the key, and that's how we see, this thing playing out over the next, really the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
So I made a few points there in one answer, but
That's okay.
that's kind of where we're.
Thanks for the information. It sounds like obviously it's essential for people to take this topic seriously, but where does somebody get started here? I mean, Colin, you talked about having all this, Google queries and billions of records. And Dwayne, did you have to go out and hire a programmer or a data analysis person as part of your service shop, or how did you process this data, or how did you make sense?
Well, for an independent shop, the easiest way and the only really economically affordable way is to partner up with a program group and let them channel something, because that way it's on a larger scale. And when I did this 3 years ago, the prices have dropped dramatically since then, and the awareness and everything has risen. But I mean, to get the system where we actually have access to the information and the customer has access, I think the best way is to use the chain of the aftermarket industry. I mean, use the power of its size, because me by myself, I'm just a little guy, but us together, we're huge. So I look up for help in that. When I go up to my program group and see what they offer, because almost all of them, if they have offered something, and some have dropped it and some are picking it back up, because like me, they failed too. But we're learning this, we're figuring it out, and I think the way for us to do it is together.
Did you also learn that customers who accepted your trial or took you up on the telematics service, did they return more frequently, or were you able to communicate with them better?
We had better communication with them, and the problem in the end was the value. The fleets for me were easier because it's a business decision. The consumers, it's a much more personal decision, and you don't want to scare a parent into telling them that your kid's going to run out of the house at 2 o'clock in the morning and go somewhere they shouldn't. But it's peace of mind knowing where that car is all the time, because I mean, you can have it alert your cell phone that the car just left the county you live in when they were only supposed to go to the movies at night.
Yeah.
But that there's so many benefits to this entire topic for consumers. It's just they don't know what they are, and we got to learn how to deliver that value to them so they understand without scaring the bejesus out of them.
Yeah, Mike, Dwayne just said he looks up the supply chain for telematics support or product support, but he also mentioned parents want to look after their kids. Colin was talking about the different utilities out there or services provided by different providers, maybe Verizon, the insurance company, obviously, with Progressive and Allstate and State Farm have their interest in telematics. There's only one OBD2 port, but how does a consumer, how does the industry reconcile the different points of interest in that port and the dongles that would apply there, and how does that access get distributed to all of the parties needed? If Verizon has a service that the consumers are interested in, does Dwayne get access to that?
It's a good question, Behzad. There is only one OBD port. You can trick an OBD port. You can try to put splitters in, but it can really impact the service in a negative way. I call it the race for the OBD port. Everybody thinks they want it. You mentioned Verizon. Can Dwayne access that? Currently with the Verizon program, I believe the answer is no. And something I don't think we completely touched on yet, there's no industry standard for communication. The information from Verizon can look completely different than it would come from Automatic or Zubicar or the 700-800 other guys out there in telematics products. That's part of the problem that makes a lot of the repair shops' lives difficult. Someday we have a vision at our company that that data will become standardized. And the dongle, we all talk about dongles. The dongle's a necessary evil. If there was ever a way to get rid of the dongle, it would just lower the cost of entry to the service. And it's really about the data. And if we could all agree to a standard of the data, and then it just becomes what value does an individual company bring to the compilation of that data. You would ask Dwayne if he needed to hire a programmer, and if he buys the right product, no. And if he buys from the right company, they're adding the value that Dwayne needs to that data to make it useful for him in a simple format. And I think ultimately that's going to become the winners and losers line of distinction in telematics is going to be, what do you do with the data? Let's assume it all does become available. Simple, standardized format. It's really incumbent on all the telematics companies to find a way to add value to that data. And if they do, the guys that do the best job will win. And this is like any other industry. There's over 800 people. I stopped counting at 800 that are claimed to be in the telematics business selling it to the United States.
Yeah.
Like most industries that are new, there'll be some massive shakeout. And I think the guy that survives, when there's 3 or 4 left at the end of the day, are the guys that add the most value.
Well,
because it's not easy today,
right.
unless you pick the right product.
Right. So I want to be mindful of our time here. We're coming up on the hour. I've heard 3 consistent themes today. One is that the need and the telematics, access to telematics, the interest in telematics is growing incredibly rapidly. The second is that the industry absolutely needs real-time access to this data. And the third is that there are solutions out there that exist, but it's a race to the OBD2 port. Now I want to ask our panelists just kind of a concluding thought here. What does the industry, there were comments around data standardization, there have been questions coming over the chat about consumer access to data. What is the highest level thing, or the one common trait or solution that you think the industry needs, the aftermarket needs to be able to benefit, or to make sure that the next teleforum we have on this topic is simply a telematics opportunity and not threat? What's the next thing that needs to happen? Colin, maybe we start with you.
I could give you a whole bunch of political answers, but the reality is what needs to happen is that the stakeholders on the call, the members of AutoCare, need to start buying at least a device or 2 and start using this for themselves. It's the only way, as a group of individual businesses, you're going to understand what the data looks like, the opportunity in the data, because there's an argument coming. As I mentioned earlier, we see it happening in Europe, where the only brute force that's going to be able to effectively compete against the OEM's desire to limit everyone on this phone call's ability to conduct business in the future, and that's not an overstatement. That is what they are attempting to do. Whether that's 2025 or 2030, they are attempting to go and limit your business's potential for the future. And in order to go and address that, you need to make the very small investment in this technology, become used to it yourself, see what the diagnostic data looks like, so that you can act as a group buying force, a group voice, to say that we collectively, not just Dwayne's comment, we collectively rely, 500,000 businesses rely on real-time access to data coming from engine diagnostics while the vehicle is being driven. And we are relying on it. This is not hypothetical. So if there's one takeaway, that's the takeaway that the AutoCare group needs to have, that the members of AutoCare need to make that small investment so that in several months' time this year, you can act as a group and make that common statement of your dependence on the technology for real-time diagnostic data to troubleshoot a vehicle while it's being driven.
So get involved so you can be informed, because independent of your business, the entire industry is dependent on your knowledge and awareness of this topic.
100%.
Dwayne, what do you think?
I'll go with what Colin said was great about getting a device and trying it. And the reason I think it's such a good idea is because probably the first thing I would say about education is it's hard to educate somebody when you don't truly understand the product yourself. And until you have it in your hands and actually get to use it and get that data, it's hard to tell a person, explain to somebody, that real hand information, makes you more confident and you sound like you know what you're talking about, so people are more willing to listen to you. So I think if people were to actually get those devices and try them, but we need to educate ourselves, which is part of getting the devices, and then our customers. And then we need to embrace the technology. I mean, it's here. It's not going to leave. And when I mean embrace, I mean like dive in. Just don't look at it and read about it and say, all right, in 5 years I'll become a part of this. They're a part of it now if they know it or not. I think they're on the threat side instead of the opportunity side. And as far as shop level, which all levels can do it, I really think elected officials listen to business owners. We're the ones, we pay plenty of taxes. We make jobs, which pays more taxes. They do want to hear from us, and I think that the shops, the owners of the shops, the owners of the businesses in the aftermarket need to talk to the elected officials. They need to tell them this is a big deal. That way, instead of the OEs having a chance to push us out, we'll keep the door in from the beginning instead of having to fight it after they already closed the door, because we don't want that. Once they close that door, it's going to be much harder for us, period. So I recommend that people talk to their elected officials. Go to the Legislative Summit in October. Get to talk to some people and make change now instead of waiting until it's too late.
Excellent. So adding on to what Colin said, not just be informed and be involved, but be vocal. Mike, what do you think?
I'm going to link both Colin and Dwayne's and give a plug to the PAC. AutoCare has a political action committee that is in desperate need of donations. And it can be $5, it can be $10, it can be any amount. Companies can make it available to their employees and to talk to your local, to interact with the officials, especially at the AutoCare Association level. And everything Colin said is so true about the impact, the risk and the impact, that I think we need to somewhat as an industry put our money, as individuals in an industry, put our money where our mouth is. And Behzad, I'm sure you have someone that could educate people around the PAC.
Yeah, absolutely. We really appreciate the comments from the panelists. We're certainly working hard every day here at the AutoCare Association, through all of our departments, and the Political Action Committee is absolutely an essential way that we're able to have an impact on the Hill and on policy. And in terms of the participation needed from the industry, our legislative summit is coming up in October, and we really hope to see as many people there as possible. In terms of having a voice, voting with our feet and being vocal is one thing, but standing there and using your voice is another thing. So really excited for that coming up, and really look forward to that participation. And personal thank you to everyone on the call today. I certainly learned a lot. I want to thank our participants, but I'll pass it off to Mike Boyer to take us out.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists for such an interesting and educational session. I really appreciate you taking the time to share the knowledge of the topic. Obviously, it seemed like that hour flew by, and it was due to the fact that the conversation was very interesting and very compelling. And thank you to Behzad for facilitating the session. Really appreciate that. Following up quickly on Mike's comment on the PAC, if you're interested in more information on the PAC, AutoCare PAC, you can go to autocareadvocacy.org. There's a lot of information on that site, and it'll point you in the direction to be able to participate in the PAC. A quick announcement, the next teleforum will take place on Friday, August 18th. Our topic will be e-commerce and much more information to come on that. Thank you all for joining us.